right, an important message on Thursday. It doesn't show it. We will have a meeting on Thursday next week. All right. Next week, we will not have, I will not be in the office. And so, or I will not be doing recordings. And so what that means is that when you go to April 18th through 22nd, which will be next week, you will not see the Zoom links there. You will need to work on position paper 4. We're going to skip position paper 3. And next week, your assignment is to work on and complete position paper number 4 on the Omni channel. And this Thursday, we will be doing a meeting starting at the introduction of the Omni channel. All right. So next week, no class, but you will have an assignment due on Thursday. All right. We'll be finishing up the last part of the week. This position paper will be sliding up to April 21st, and we will have our last meeting on April 26th with our final May 4th. Okay. So we finished talking about the end user or service outputs that are used for market segmentation. And now we have to talk about how do we actually use those in order to create individual market segments. And basically what we have is we have a 3-step process. First off, let's recognize is that groups of end users have different service output needs. And that makes us want to buy differently than other individuals. And so I've mentioned before, my friend who's actually a tailor, and this is part of an example here, is that there are people who are very service sensitive, but very price insensitive. And so they talk about Albert Carroll, which visits their customers at home and provides quality tailoring as opposed to them to come to their place. My friend does the exact same thing. And so each individual has their own unique way in which they wish to have their services provided to them. So an example is that since COVID, there's 2 things that have gone on. One of them is, of course, is the COVID difficulties and the way that it has closed restaurants. But then you also saw this thing happening over the last 2 years where 8 to 12 million individuals have dropped out of employment. And so you have this dual thing going on where you have calling in or you have the ordering going online, but the difficulty, of course, is delivery is taking far longer than it used to be. And so I am a firm user of buy online, pick up in store. When I order things, if I order it, I will order it online. And instead of waiting for somebody to deliver food to me in an hour, I'll go pick it up. That's an example of where I have unique service needs and I buy things in a different way than others do. It's interesting because I had a student who interviewed me in consumer behavior saying that those individuals who are teaching IT are all delivery all the time, which I find to be fascinating. So it's this information, this observation that we do that ultimately defines how we segment end users by service output. And so how do we do this? All right. So the first thing we do is we go about and we generate a list of customers. We generate a list basically from qualitative research, such as focus groups and interviews. And we start generating a list of individuals or customers. And then what we do after that, after we do these qualitative focus groups and these interviews, is we divide those individuals based upon common product or advertising decisions and the way that they, in essence, pattern themselves in the things that they desire. Now, when we talk about the six service outputs, the questions we're going to ask are not going to be perfectly aligned, or let's just say in a way that we might think of them. So when we talk about spatial convenience, we're not going to say is spatial convenience more important to you. They're going to be much more specific, like, do you need more support before or after the sale? That would be an example, all right? You would take that information and you would divide them up into segments. And what you would do it is you would use exploratory research, like exploratory factor analysis is one of those. And you would define these groups in unique ways. Each of these groups and how they want the goods delivered to them are going to be unique and different from other groups. When you define something, there's two things that you need to think of. One of them is that the definition has to be everything that it is and nothing that it isn't. And so it's collectively exhaustive and mutually exclusive. And so when we talk about these groups, or when you collect information, you're going to find that people's service outputs, their market segments, are going to fall into unique categories that are like each other and different from others. And so this is what the division of segments do. And then the last thing you're going to do is you're going to name them. And you're going to name them by their basic actions, or in one way or another that makes them particularly unique. It kind of facilitates, your communication of these individuals. It helps you to personify these groups, and they become real to you. So that's the importance of doing this naming part, okay? So what we have coming next is we have an example of this, and it kind of gives you an idea of how we go about doing these things and how we go about talking about these individuals. So this was done for CDW, Computer Discount Warehouse. And if you look at this slide, what you have is you have the data information. And what they found is that when they talked about these groups, they actually fell into 4 different categories. And here they are, all right, 4 different unique groups. Now, one of the things that if you'll notice is at the bottom where it says total, if you look through all of those service output priorities, the things that they think are important, you notice that it in essence totals 100. Now, why would you do this? Well, an example is that if you were asking questions like, what is important to you? Price, service, overall satisfaction, the answer to all of those things could be quite simply, all of them do. Well, the difficulty with that is it doesn't assign a priority. And whenever you see these 100s, you have an example of what's known as a constant sum scale. A constant sum scale assigns a hierarchy based upon importance. What a constant sum scale does is it accepts the idea that resources are limited and that you have to make everyday choices when you're choosing what you ultimately wish to have or how you need to have them. And so if you were to take all of those down the list and total them together, they would be 100. And so when you fill these things out, if you've done this before, you have to assign a numerical value to whatever you think. Now, it may seem silly in a certain way that you're trying to, how do you know the difference between a 32 and a 31? How do you come up with that? But the truth is that with enough research, what you do is that these constant sum scales accurately reflect what consumers consider to be the most important. Okay, so let's look at these categories one at a time. So the first group, if you look in the blue, the most important thing for the group in blue is lowest price. Now remember, one of the things that I said is that price is not a service output, but it is also a consideration for consumers when they're making choices. So that's why you put in that. If you look at it, and we're just going to go down the list, lowest price is first. The next is responsive assistance during the decision process. In other words, they want someone there to help them. If you notice, they also think it's important that they have product demonstrations and trials and proactive advice and counseling. And all of these things are before the sale. Now, they considered installation and training support as equally important as the advice before. But if you notice after that, responsive problem solving after a sale and ongoing relationship, they don't need that at all. And so at the very top, that is step 3. They've given that group a name. Lowest total cost pre-sales info segment. In other words, they want everything up front. And the truth is that the lowest price is the only thing that they care about. And so what I could glom from this, they don't need references and credentials. They don't need financial stability and longevity. If I were reading between the lines and looking at this, I would say probably they have their own support staff and they don't need us to do anything much for them. And so that's the first thing I would think about. So let's look at the next group. The next group, lowest price, which was important to the first group, means absolutely nothing at all, or let's just say minimal amounts. However, what they are looking for, if you look at the very bottom 3 things, they're looking for significant help solving problems after the sale. They need installation and training support, and they need an ongoing relationship with their supplier. What I'm glomming from this group or this individual group is that they do not have any support staff whatsoever. And in essence, you will be their support staff. That's what they're looking for. And so they are categorized as responsive support post-sales segment. And so money means very little to them. But what means a lot to them is that they have someone to call on when they have issues after the sale. The next one is really spread over a lot of places. They're looking for a one-stop solution so they don't have to go anywhere else. They want an ongoing relationship with a supplier. And those 2 things are more important before anything else is, which is fascinating to look at. Then the next level is installation and training, responsive problem solving, and responsive assistance before. And once again, this is a corporation you might consider to be around a little bit longer than the responsive support group. They're looking to carry an ongoing relationship with you as a corporation. They look like they would probably create a substantial support group that you would need to be supporting. And so they're ultimately going to be important as well. And the name of their group is Full Service Relationship Segment. Now, the last group is somewhat baffling. They need nothing in terms of an ongoing relationship. They don't want responsive problem solving. They care nothing about price, little with installation and proactive, but they want references and credentials. They expect financial stability and longevity as you as a group, and they expect proactive advice and consulting before the sale is ever met. And so this is a group that needs very much for your organization to have referent power. They want to be identified with you as an organization. They want to say that your organization has outfitted them and that they're quite satisfied with that effort. And that is they're looking for you to have been around for a long time, and yet they don't care whatsoever in terms of the relationship that they have with you. So we come up with this and we ask ourselves, which groups do we want to go after? Now, the last thing that we have to talk about is actually who are the actual percentage of respondents themselves. And so the total cost group is 16%. The responsive support group is 13. The full service relationship is 61. And the references and credentials segment is 10. And so you ask yourself, which group do you want to shoot for? Well, the most logical thing that you could think of is that you want to go for the biggest market as possible. And so you'd be looking at the full service relationship segment. But the problem with making that choice is that group has to be able, if you're going to go after them, you have to be able to support them long-term with a very aggressive staff who are willing to sit there and handhold them through the process. And so what are the things, if you're going after a group like that, since lowest price is not important to them, is that you need to make sure that you have on-site service contracts. How do they calculate on-site service? Usually it's 20% of the original purchase price. That's how they calculate that kind of online or that kind of support. And so you might go after that group if you want to, but you must have the organizational structure to be able to handle that group as well. Maybe you are a corporation that all you're there for is you're a warehouse. In essence, the goods flow in and they flow out, and that's all that you're built for. Well, then the total cost group might be the one you're looking for. But you've also got to have individuals who are worth their salt. They've got to be able to be responsive before the sale and provide them with what they need. And then once you sell them the things, well, they don't need you anymore. Now, you might also be able to look at this chart and see that the responsive support post-sales segment and the full service relationship segment are actually kind of close, all right? Other than the one-stop solution, but that doesn't mean for you to change your infrastructure substantially, all right? If you look at all the other pieces of the puzzles, they're actually quite close together, other than the enormous amount of need for responsive problem solving after and the ongoing relationship. You could say figuratively that those two things are very close to each other and somewhat practically the same. And so you could go after responsive support post-sale segment and full service relationship segment with the same structure that you have with slightly different messages for those particular groups, and you'd pick up nearly 3/4 of the market. It just depends on the infrastructure of your organization and whether or not you can handle that group. Now, the last one is something of an enigma. It's only 10% of the market. It requires you to have some strong infrastructure, and yet they don't need your infrastructure at all. Not a bit, other than training and support, but it's minimal next to their desire for you to be for you to be substantial, and that's it. And so after going through this, and you're probably asking yourself then, well, what's the answer? Well, the answer is that it depends on you as an organization. How strong is your corporation? Do you have strong support at the beginning? Are you there really as a warehouse to be able to sell as many items as you can? And ultimately, that is your market structure. And so the only way you can answer that question is for you to decide, or for you to understand your own organization's strengths and weaknesses. And from there, you'll get the answer. Okay. So here we're going through it again, just to step through it. You identify the segments you're serving. You establish the output demand for each segment. In other words, what segments they have or need. And then you look for patterns and then you name them. And so this is the function or the way that you go about doing it. So use this as a 3-step process. Now, let's also say this. Ultimately, we also know that there's a trade-off between price and service. There's no doubt about it. Once again, and I talk about price not being part of the service outputs, but you cannot forget it or deny it because people go on that particular item, all right? We make choices based on price, all right? Remember that different segments will want more of different service outputs, and that one strategy is not an overall situation, and that price is not the only consideration. Many times price is no object at all. That service means everything. And so all of those things need to be reflected when you go through that 3-step process and determine ultimately what you need and what is more important. So once again, I buy online, I pick up in store. Other people buy online, they have it delivered. My father is one of those individuals who would shop inside a retail establishment and do nothing else. And so realize the way consumers act, we all have our own different ways in which we need to purchase. And so the last thing to talk about is how does this affect the omni-channel? Well, the first thing we know of is that it is more difficult to track offline interactions than online. And so there are things that consumers do outside of the online environment that make it difficult for us to be able to bring the channels together to understand exactly how consumers shop. Different segments prefer different channels. As I've said before, I buy online, I pick up in store because that is what is to me the most desired thing that I wish to do. My father would either go on the phone or they would go directly and he would not do anything else. He never used email, he never did anything else. When I am needing a service request, I absolutely refuse to use the telephone because nothing is more aggravating than sitting on a phone for 30 minutes. But I will go online and I will do relay chat online with the customer support system if I can, and I do that before anything else. And so that's kind of one of those examples. But the difficulty is that how do you account for my father who never went online, never did any of those things, and how do you track that if it isn't online? And that's what makes it difficult. Some of us do nothing but research shopping, okay? I research shop for my automobile when I bought it last year. I needed a new car. You know, the first decision I make is I make the decision to buy, but not buy a new one, but a used one. So I wanted certain criteria, certain sizes, and I decided on a Toyota. And the other things that I started doing is I started looking at what I considered to be the acceptable minimal standards that I needed in making my choice. And so I did all of my shopping online, and that's what's known as research shopping, when only one channel is used only for research. However, I made the purchase directly online. And so that is not what research shopping is. What is research shopping is what I did when I bought my 75-inch television. So I bought a 75-inch QLED UHD 4K TV a year ago. Was it 2? I can't remember anymore. 2 years ago when I got my tenure and bought it before my wife realized how big it was. Now she loves it. She wouldn't trade it. But anyway, I did all my shopping online. I looked at everything, what I considered to be the final choices that I made. But even though 40 to 60% of all electronics are bought online, 2/3 of the individuals need to go actually see it in the stores. So I went into Walmart, looked at it inside the Walmart store, and I bought it from Walmart. And it ultimately had it delivered to my house. The other thing about it also is that the individual who delivered it actually brought inside my house, which was awesome. And so I'm one of these people in which it's difficult when I use one channel only for research and I made the purchase in another environment. And that's what makes the omni-channel and defining end-use segments so different. The last thing to note is that customer segmentation can affect channel segmentation and vice versa. And so what do I mean by that? All right. If a consumer only wants a certain brand only through a certain way, then the only brands that they're going to accept are the brands that they can get through their channel. My father would only buy things that he could go into the store, look at them, and purchase them that way. By the very same token, on the flip side, there are those individuals who only look online, only buy that way, and only buy those things that they can be shipped to them. That's another example. And so the channels can affect the brand choice. Flip it around in the other direction, the brand choice can affect the channels. And so if you're an individual who's only going to buy a MacBook Pro, and you're going to want certain things on that particular MacBook, then you're limited to the ways that you can buy those things. Either you buy them from Apple Direct, you buy them from the university store, or you buy them secondhand in some other market. And you are, fixed upon those particular items. Those are the only ones you're going to want, and those are the only channels that you're going to consider. And so ultimately, in the end, what this means is that channels, when we're talking about market segmentation, is difficult for you to track. You get a lot of pollution in there, especially when it comes to the omni-channel. But there are defined user segments with sufficient research that if you understand their service outputs and which ones they desire, then ultimately what you can do is create solutions based upon their focus and their desire for it to be brought to them in a given way. Okay, I have an evaluation that I have to go to in about 10 minutes, so I'm going to cut this short. Everybody, have a good day. I will be in here on Thursday. You will see the link, and then next week I'll send an email on this. There will be nothing other than for you to be in your groups and do the position paper. So thank you much. Everybody have a good day.